But what are people getting wrong about this? When we see, the bombing of Palestine, when we see children being harmed, and we see that Palestinians are unable to access medical supplies or clean water or things like that. What about that? Are we not what are we missing?
So I think two things. One is history, and the second is really the aperture of the lens that you're using to look at the conflict with. So let's start with the second thing, which is if you're looking at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict like this, you're going to see exactly, to some extent, Tim, what you just described. You're going to see Israel as the Goliath, it has the military power, et cetera, and you're going to see Palestinians as having the less strong hand. But if you widen out and zoom out with your lens, what you're going to see is an entire region filled with something like 22 Arab and Muslim nations, and a Jewish state, the only Jewish state in the world that is smaller than New Jersey. That state surrounded on all sides, the Abraham Accords aside, and we can get into that, by people that don't seek its borders to be shifted, but that fundamentally seek its destruction. I think the thing that people fundamentally get wrong is that they think that this is a conflict fundamentally about borders. It is not a conflict about borders. It is a conflict about whether or not Israel has a right to exist. It is a conflict about Zionism and anti-Zionism. It's a conflict about whether Jews, like every other people, has a right to self-determination, in this case, in their native land, or whether or not they don't. That is what the conflict is about, whether or not Jews can have any presence in the region of the Middle East at all. That's what this conflict is about. And so to go back kind of to, to go back, I watched the Abbey Martin clip, and of course I, defend her sacred right to say that 9/11 was an inside job and everything else that she says. But
well, there's a lot about 9/11 we don't know, whether it's an inside job or not. I mean, it's not. There's a lot we don't know. We covered for Saudi Arabia for years. Then we said we released a 9/11 Commission report. The people on the 9/11 Commission report said it was set up to fail. I mean, these are direct quotes. So I mean, it's not. I understand that. No one's saying Jews did 9/11 or whatever. I know some people are.
Well, some people are.
Some people are. But there's a lot we don't know. There's a lot we weren't dealt with, honestly, about 9/11. We went and attacked Iraq, so.
Okay. Well, okay. That was a throwaway line.
I understand what you mean.
What I meant to say is that, everyone has the right to their own positions, but I'm not going to sit here and listen while people spew lies. And there's a giant lie that's being told right now about Israel, and it has incredible power right now, especially on the far left. And that lie goes like this: the Jews are white people, they're ethno-colonialist nationalists who dropped into a foreign exotic land with which they have no connection. And since 1948, when they plopped into this land, they have systematically taken that land from the indigenous brown population of Palestinians. And indeed, more than that, they're bloodthirsty, they're warmongers, and they won't stop until they've, immiserated the people around them. And the problem with this is that absolutely none of it is true. It is a fantasy projection created by people with small brains who have an attention span the length of a TikTok video. The Jews let's start with the Jews aren't white. The Jews are from the Middle East. The Jews go back to the Middle East for 3,000 years. That is the reality. The Jewish people precedes the modern conceptions that we have of race and of religion, okay? They were a tribe. They were the Judeans. They were the Judahites living in Judea. And the Jewish presence in what we now call the land of Israel or the Palestine, that goes back all the way back to that period way before Jesus was ever around. The Jews themselves were colonized, speaking of colonization. They were colonized by the Romans. They were colonized by the Byzantines. They were colonized by the Crusaders, by the Ottomans, and finally by the British. And, just to give people a little bit of historical perspective, what is Palestine? What is that name? The Romans renamed the region Syria Palestina after the Philistines to kind of give a middle finger to the Jews that they had pushed out as a way of punishing the Jews because the Philistines were their mortal enemy. So it's like when Israel sort of miraculously, and I think this is what makes it such a hard story for people to understand, most indigenous populations are screwed over. They never get a chance to return to their land. But Israel got that chance after the Holocaust in 1948, 1947, 1948. And basically the UN comes to the Jewish people and says, we are, and the Arabs living in the region, and says, here is the partition plan. Essentially, the Jews get half, the Muslims get half, and not the Muslims. The Jews get half, the Arabs get half. And the Jews said, great. And their motivation for saying great was they weren't going to get anything else. And in totally realpolitik terms, it makes sense that the Palestinians said no. But then they said no again after every single offer to split the land. And I think that is really what it's about in the end. Do Jews have any right to have any self-determination in any piece of their indigenous land or not? And by the way, it's not to say that, given that like little history that I just swept you through, the Crusades and everything else, like, is there a long-standing Palestinian connection to the land and Muslim connection to the land?
Yes.
Of course there is.
Right.
Is there a long-standing Christian connection? Of course there is.
Right.
The question is only, do we also acknowledge that the Jews have a connection to that land or not? And that to me is what everything is about.
Is there room for an argument or a debate where people say we completely understand Israel's right to exist, we support Israel's right to exist, but the expansive nature of a lot of the policies, and maybe Netanyahu himself as being somebody who is, has certainly put more of a right-wing face on policies and the bulldozing of the settlements and evicting people from their homes. Is there a space for people to argue, like, listen, we think Israel should exist, but I think because when you say colonial power, I think part of what gives that argument credence in people's minds is that the borders of Israel don't seem to be fixed. They constantly seem to keep expanding, and Israel keeps evicting people from their homes. And there is that is what most people regard as a colonial posturing from Israel. It's not like, okay, here are the borders and we're done. And I'm sure it's, there's some complexities there, but that's why, like you said, people are saying, oh, Israel's a colonial state, but it seems like that they're not finished. Like the borders aren't, rock solid, that they're expanding and taking more and more territory. And some people fear that they want all the territory.
Right. So is there a space to criticize Bibi Netanyahu? 100%. I'll do it right now. I did it often in the pages of the New York Times. Is there a place to oppose settlements and settlement expansion in the West Bank? Of course, I oppose them. I do that all the time. What this is about, again, is fundamental existence. And let me just give you an example of that. In 2005, Israel pulled out every single Jew, every single Israeli that lived in the Gaza Strip, every single one, left all of the infrastructure, the hot houses behind, etc. What happens then? It's not that there is a flourishing, Singapore in the Gaza Strip. Could have been possible. Tons of money flowed into Gaza. Instead, what there is a piece of land in rocket proximity to the center of Israel, run by a group that says in its charter that their goal is not two states, that their goal is to exterminate every single Jew. This is from their charter. There is no solution to the Palestinian question except through jihad. The day of judgment will not come about until the Muslims fight Jews and kill them. Then the Jews will hide behind the rocks and trees, and the rocks and trees will cry out, "O Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill them." That's not just in the founding. It's also in these videos that I pulled for you that I don't think many people see. So maybe we want to play the one with the Hamas senior official talking about.
We'll do that now, and we'll add that in post.
Great.
وبدنا اياكم يا اهل القدس بالسكاكين امعطوا رقاب اليهود كلها هي تقف على العرق من هان 5 شيكل تشتري لك سكينه واضيه مضيها وهنا على طول حزه 5 شيكل 5 شيكل انك تذل دولة الكافر لا تجدن اشد الناس عداوة للذين امنوا اليهود والذين اشركوا لقد افسد اليهود لقد تغطرس اليهود وآن الآن حسابهم وآن الآن تدميرهم على أيديكم.
Great. And And then there's a second video where the mother of a Palestinian martyr, as they would call him, talks about the Jews and says, may their hearts be ripped out. May their eyes be gouged out.
لا زال شأن اليهود الذين قتلوا أنبياء الله بيد وحرفوا كتبهم باليد الأخرى قد حان وقت حسابهم لتشل أيديهم وتقطع أفئدتهم وتقلع أعينهم.
So that is what happened when Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip. Now you have this situation where Israel is occupying the West Bank. And it's a horrible situation, and I oppose it. The problem is that just from a purely existential perspective, given what happened when Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip, there is an understandable fear. And if you want to understand why so many Israelis feel torn about this, their fear is, okay, what happens if we pull out of the West Bank and there is another Hamas terrorist statelet at our other border, and the midpoint of Israel is like a mile wide? That's an existential problem. And so you have a tension where obviously continuing to occupy another people that, I believe in a two-state solution. I believe in the Palestinian right to self-determination, just as I believe in the Jewish one, period. But you have to understand where that fear is coming from and why Israel doesn't just unilaterally pull out of the West Bank as they did in Gaza, 15 years ago.
Right.